Welcome to Healthier Humans, Season 2, Episode 3. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about feelings.
Feelings?
Yeah.
Communication.
Communication, of which
Ultimately.
feelings are a part.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Today's our first episode with video.
It is. Very
Which is kinda
exciting.
cool.
Hi, video. Yeah. Cool. So, what we had chatted about in terms of getting the content and kind of figuring out what we wanted to talk about in this episode. One, someone did ask me if we would talk about communication. And two, we're both people, which means we have to communicate with patients, clients, spouses, children, general people around us in the world. So, yeah, obviously communication is a huge part of living a really great life, and so we can just start there.
Yeah. And as I explained or asked Robin before, I thought I might participate more as a listener in this episode and kind of ask her questions along the way. You can just speak. We brought in a book. I brought in a book which I've read and I really enjoyed. It's called Nonviolent Communication. So Robin will kind of, I guess, pick things out or ask her questions from that. Maybe the sort of structure of the structure of this form of communication, I guess, or this.
Yeah.
Call it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the reason that it's something that is great to talk about is because we're communicating all the time. So originally we had started with, hey, would you feel comfortable with me asking you how lessons you've learned from communicating in your relationship, like with Jade, or things that you're learning communicating with clients, and so obviously it's a helpful skill for multiple different areas of life, but we might start kind of like what that can look like in the home, and then work our way out to what that looks like with other people.
I can tell you straight away after reading this a while ago now, but after reading this, I was shocked at how poorly I communicate and just even respond to someone else's communication with myself, and also observing other people and how they communicate. It really blew me away because, that might be a Kiwi thing maybe. I don't know. It's definitely a male Kiwi thing to like make a horrific stereotype, but...
Yeah, I don't know. I think people forget that it's a skill.
Yep.
That it's not just an automatic, like either you're good with communication or you're not. Like it really is a learned thing. And so the great part about that is if you want to get better at it, you can. And likewise, there's no cop-outs. Like, oh, I'm just not good at communication. Sure. Like, it's just because you're choosing not to develop that skill.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
yeah. Yeah. So maybe what would be cool to start with is, I don't know if you're comfortable sharing an example of maybe like communication gone wrong, or where you felt like you were trying to get a point across, or someone else was trying to get a point across to you, and like it was just not clicking. Do you have an example or anything like that?
Not off the top of my head, but I think for a lot of the time we get a little bit stuck in our own heads, and we don't put any emphasis or try to understand how the other person's feeling or how they perceive things to be in the situation.
Yep.
We only ever, you see this like with politics and
especially right now.
Yeah.
Hideous.
This is what I want, or this is what I believe, so this is right.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw I was briefly watching, believe it or not, was watching the news the other night. It was in the background, but there was this footage of like at the moment there's this whole anti-abortion thing going on, and there was footage at this. It was in New Zealand. This protest, and there were protesters from both sides, but they were just standing there just yelling at each other. And I just looked and I was like, there's no way that anything positive would ever be able to come out of this conversation.
Not helpful at all.
So I think that's probably a really far end of the spectrum. example of how maybe our poor communication.
Yeah, and that's probably the best and maybe the easiest way to start, just in terms of like principally for communication, even outside of the MBC framework, is the biggest rule is always seek first to understand, and that idea that people are usually pretty willing to listen to you once they feel heard, right? But if you never take the time to actually acknowledge and understand where someone's coming from, there's less desire on their part to want to hear you out because you are not hearing them. And so the great part about that is like you can always choose to be the leader in the situation, which means that you're just the one that chooses, okay, let me just pause for a moment and let me make sure I'm understanding where this person is actually coming from. And so it's kind of what we talked about last time, that idea that between, stimulus or an event or a comment and your chosen response, you have the choice and you have the freedom to choose what you want to say there or how you want to go about things. And I think that's where you see a lot of communication, I guess, like break down, is when people aren't pausing to understand that they're just getting triggered emotionally, and then so they're just firing back these emotional responses. And like you said, nothing productive, nothing helpful is ever going to come from a situation like that. We've all been in them where we're like, we just like get angry or get, frustrated about something, and then like, the not nicest things come out of our mouth.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really about understanding that like you can actually pause, you can choose, you don't have to react. There's just way more choice. And slowing down when things get really heated, that's probably another big point, is if things are getting really heated, there's emotions are running high, it seems like a sensitive topic, just slowing down your thought process, your word choice, all of those things, really important. So, yeah.
That's one thing I've learned very much is practice behaviourist. It's a learnt skill, that ability to be in that conversation and not just blow up. Because I've absolutely been in that situation before, where someone says something that you don't agree with or whatnot, and instead of being able to process it and then word your response to that, it's just like, you go all red and get all shaky and like, I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah, totally. Give me back my ball. I'm going home. But it's so true. And Brené Brown, obviously, like, she's done some amazing work in the area, because what happens is sometimes people will make a comment or like insinuate something, and if we interpret it as shame, it literally sends us back into like our primal brain, right? Into that very like reactive, automated, like fight or flight response. And so people have this like physiological reaction, they get like all riled up, and like when you are in shame or when you're in your lizard primal brain, whatever you want to call it, you don't think well. Like it's literally like being on drugs, like drunk or something. But like your brain is not functioning well. So the first thing is you got to be able to like recognize what's happening within you. So especially with shame, it's so powerful, and people get triggered so quickly. And so usually that leads to either like an angry response or shutting down. And so if we're getting angry or we're feeling that hot flush, that warm flush, that like pit in our stomach, then it's really important to be able to recognize like what's happening and like give yourself some space if at all possible. And one of the ways that's really helpful to do that is just to try and ask questions, to give yourself some time to like come back into your your cognitive mind and actually be able to think more critically about what's happening versus just firing off these emotional responses, because like our instinctive and reactive brain has been set off.
For sure, and your ability to think and express yourself just is completely shut down, hey?
Yeah, we pretty much suck at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good time for me to maybe just bullet point the main components of the NVC, which you've just explained. So the first thing is observation. So this is the concrete actions we are observing that are affecting our well-being. So essentially, you're in a conversation or you're in a situation and somebody has said something. Don't just respond, actually just observe the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is then how we feel in relation to what we're observing. So that's take a little bit more time and actually, how do you feel about what's happened?
Yep. I'm like, I can think of so many examples while you're talking. I'll give you.
Do you want me to stop and we can go through one by one, or do you want me to just list them out first so people get an idea?
No, go ahead,
Yeah.
list them out, yeah.
So we want to observe first, then we want to feel in relation to what we're observing. The third one is the needs, values, desires, etc. that are creating our feelings, so based off what we've observed. And then the concrete actions we request in order to enrich our lives.
Yeah.
So you've just told me something, I've observed it, how have I felt about what I've observed?
Yeah.
What are my needs, values and desires that are creating, I suppose, my feelings and respond to what you've said?
Yeah.
And then what am I actually going to do? What am I going to request of you?
Yeah, okay, so I'll give you an example because
Yeah.
this is probably the easiest way to understand how this actually looks in real life. And so, for example, like I have a gorgeous 18-year-old stepdaughter living with me. And let's say, for example, if I came downstairs and I saw there was like peanut butter all over the counter or like splatters of porridge because she was making herself breakfast. Now I have a choice in terms of how I want to interpret what I'm seeing. So what I'm seeing is peanut butter on the counter, porridge over here, dirty dishes over here, and my natural inclination is to be like, ah! Like, we've had this conversation so many times, like, how hard is it? But what NBC would encourage us to do is to say, okay, hey, when I see peanut butter on the counter, porridge on the counter, what I feel frustrated because I have a need for it to be tidy. I have a need for it to be sanitary. And when there's food left out, it just doesn't sit well with me. And so then the request part of it is, would you be willing to wiping up the counters after you've cooked your breakfast? So that's all MVC is. It's like, instead of saying like, you're such a slob, which is an attacking, personalized statement about our interpretation of somebody's behavior, it's just slowing it down and being a little bit more objective. So trying to like pull yourself out from being real intense about things and being like, hey, I'm seeing food left out. I'm seeing things, over here. And basically, I'm interpreting it as like a mess. And I don't get the sense that you're coming back to clean it up.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you what I'm seeing rather than attacking you as a person. So I'm seeing this versus you do this or you are this way. And then instead of, because what most of us do, I think, is we make feeling statements, which are more thinking statements. And what I mean by that is, rather than saying like, I feel frustrated, people often would say things like, I feel like you don't care, right? So it's not really like the feeling there would be, I feel hurt because I don't feel like you're considering what I need. So part of it is trying to get really clear and using language to describe our emotions. And I think the only reason that we don't do it is because, one, we don't usually have a great emotional vocabulary because we haven't been taught one. And two, to share how you feel, like explicitly, in terms of like, hey, I'm feeling hurt, hey, I'm feeling sad, is quite vulnerable.
Yeah.
And if you don't know or you don't trust that it's safe to share that, or that people actually care, or you don't feel like your emotions are going to be heard, you tend not to, which means you tend to make statements about other people's behavior rather than owning how you actually feel. So that, I think, is like a lot of the value of using, if you need a framework, it's a great framework to have, just to help you start getting into that place where you are taking ownership for your own emotions and becoming more objective rather than making like these subjective attacking type statements.
Yeah, you're communicating in a way that doesn't give the other person the chance to become defensive, I guess, and attack them, like you said.
Yeah.
It's just an observation on how whatever's happened makes you, feel.
Yeah, totally. One of the other ways, like, because sometimes it's like, oh, it's like a 4-part formula, like that could feel potentially overwhelming for people, even though it's pretty simple. But one of the other things that, like, my husband and I have found to be really helpful is if we are in a place where we feel like emotional, right? Whether it's shame or frustration or whatever it is, what we tend to say to each other is, hey, the story I'm making up right now is you didn't do this because you don't care about me. And then it gives the other person a chance to say like, oh, sorry, like that's not my intention. What I actually was thinking was this, and this. And so it just invites conversation if you do it nicely.
Yeah. Well,
right?
it's the same thing. You're not straight up saying, you've done this because you don't care about me.
Yeah.
I feel like, you're putting it back on yourself almost, and your responses versus their actions, I suppose.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so you're being generous with your assumptions of their intentions, which is like, hey, I don't know if this is how you mean to come across. I don't think this is probably what you are trying to communicate, but what I'm telling myself. So you're owning your interpretation. Because I think the biggest thing to remember is that, like, things don't have meaning unless you give them meaning. So you could do something and it doesn't actually have meaning to me until I put a story together.
Right.
And as humans, that is our primary goal, right? We are meaning-making machines. From the time we are small, we're making up stories. That's why kids always think they're the center of the universe when they're little, is because they're just trying to make sense of how things relate to them. And then as adults, hopefully as we are making meaning, we can actually step back and say, like, is that the true meaning? Is that actually what's happening there? Or am I just making these assumptions?
Definitely, yeah.
And so, I think the story that I'm telling myself right now is really helpful because you're owning the meaning that you're putting on something. And it gives the person an opportunity to say, oh, that's not the meaning I intended. This is actually what I was trying to do. And it just allows and invites clarity into the conversation. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but do you think we may be somewhat hardwired to make those stories in our heads? Like, for an example, if I've got someone on the massage table and if there hasn't, if I've made the mistake of not really communicating really well with what they want out of the session and what they want to do, I'll be working away and then I'll think, I'll make up the story based off, I don't know, my observation of their body language or something like that. They're not enjoying this massage, or this is not what they wanted me to work on, and then I'll build this big thing in my head, and then I'm probably portraying this negative energy to them, and then it's just this big really vicious cycle, whereas they may have been loving the massage. I don't know, but totally. I just naturally tend to go down this negative loop of assumptions that, and then you create anxiety in your head and all the rest of it.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's so powerful just in general, is we forget that the words we choose to use and the stories we make up dictate how we feel. So even if you have this like instinctive emotional reaction to something, what you then tell yourself about it is either going to perpetuate the frustration or the like negative kind of like intense feeling, or you're going to say like, okay, hold on, like I'm feeling like this. Is that actually rooted in reality? Or am I just being sensitive, right now? Am I just feeling insecure, so I'm more likely to feel attacked, whatever it is? So when it comes to good communication, just like with good social skills in general, a lot of that hinges on your own self-awareness and your ability. Like, if you can't identify and name your emotions, which I really struggled with for like the majority of my life. We didn't talk a lot about feelings growing up. They weren't necessarily validated in the sense, and like from a good place. What I mean by that is if I was upset or frustrated about something, and if I was like, reacting like you do when you're a kid, because you don't necessarily know, a lot of the times I would get back, instead of empathy, when something was hard, like if I'd had a really hard day or had a misunderstanding in a fight with one of my friends, instead of being able to say like, hey, like I feel really disappointed right now, or I'm really hurt, I would just get upset. Like I would just get angry. And then the kind of like theme in our home was like, oh, you can choose to have a grateful attitude instead. And so, which is well intentioned and it's true, but it just missed out like that important piece of like having the feeling actually be validated first.
So sort of unpacking the emotion.
Yeah. Because you can't really move on
right.
until you first acknowledge what the problem is and you've given it some space. Because that's the thing is like, I think we can be real quick to dismiss the things that don't feel great. So we can be really quick to dismiss or want to kind of like move on or like talk ourselves out of feeling hurt or disappointed. But that's actually a really normal and healthy human emotion. And so just to have the space to say like, actually, I'm feeling disappointed right now and I just need some like time, right? Really normal. And so this is why with nonviolent communication or just empathy in general, it's so important to actually take the time to acknowledge and empathize with what someone's feeling, because you're validating the person, and then only once that happens can you really make progress or headway in terms of like then clarifying what's actually happening, and clearing up some of the stories. But if the emotions just kind of get like brushed to the side, or they're never really validated, then they just fester, and they just come out real nasty in other ways.
Yeah, the book, like I say, it's been a while since I read it, but there's lots of examples in the book I was talking about getting to the bottom of what it is that someone's actually trying to say, and then, like you say, validating what they want, because I think but people can be, myself included, we don't express what it actually is that we want from the situation very well. We say everything else under the sun, and we get all wound up about it, but we don't actually communicate what it is, what I want you to do, or what I want from you, or and then it does not help the situation.
Totally.
Which is something I really noticed after I read this book. I observed from other people with how they would communicate. Like we spoke last episode, like everything, it's definitely a practice skill. It was all well and good me reading this book, but and having it in my head and sort of understanding the premise and being able to observe it, but actually being able to use it as a useful tool in communication, it's not going to happen straight away. Like, no. It definitely would take some practice.
It takes a lot of practice and a lot of awareness. And like when you're learning anything new, I think the other thing that's really important is just having some compassion with yourself, because you are going to mess it up, right? It's a new thing. You aren't going to get it right all the time. And so sometimes people just add like more layers onto things where they're trying to get better at something, but if it doesn't go well, they then are really harsh and like critical or condemning of themselves, which just makes it harder, actually, versus, moving them forward. And interesting when you talked about that, maybe watching someone's body language, or kind of like, someone moving a certain way or having a certain look on their face, like even so a nonverbal, right? And observing that in a client on the massage table. I think what most people do is they'll go to a story and then they'll just try and like work around things, or they'll try and make adjustments based on their story, versus being like, hey, just want to check in, how are you going, notice this, make the observation, like, not sure if that's a pain face or if like you're having to get like what's happening here, but just being willing to take the time to clarify, hey, this is what I'm seeing, is this accurate, is there anything that I need to adjust, right? And the willingness to like just ask the question, I think is so important, because it's probably the thing we don't do. We make we choose our responses based off a lot of assumptions, and that's the thing that always gets us into trouble. Whether it's in your romantic relationship or with kids or with anyone really.
I think I've asked you this question before on this podcast, but have you seen the Ricky Gervais movie, The Invention of Lying?
No.
It's probably a really average movie, but I really enjoyed it. But essentially, The Invention of Lying. So essentially the premise is, I'm not sure if it's set sort of current time, or it may have been set back in the 60s, not sure, but essentially nobody lies. Like, lying hasn't been invented. People just walk around and speak exactly what's on their mind, but it's not like abrupt or abusive, because in the context of this movie, that's just what everyone does. And when I watched it, I thought life would be so much easier if everyone just spoke exactly how they felt, and people wouldn't be offended by it because they had no reason to be offended, because it's just what you did. And I think so Ricky Gervais' character figures out, or he invents the ability to lie, because he's in a bank. He must have to pay a bill or something, and he goes to, I think it was set back in the day, because he has to like take money out of the bank with I don't know how he write a check or something and take it out of the bank. And he's like, I need $500, and the bank teller is like, okay, do you have $500 in your account? And he knew he didn't, but he was like, yeah. And she said, okay, great. And then she gave him $100, and then he was like, oh my god, I just made something up. So that's how he invented the concept of lying.
Interesting. I'll have to look for it now.
But no, I just really like it just was quite refreshing that people would just walk around and just. You can't obviously do that now in our world, because.
Well, why not?
Well, because why not? Because we don't communicate. Everyone gets offended if you say something, and
So you can.
You can if you
just
have the framework and know how to communicate what you're feeling.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm saying is, as a collective, we're not all in that position right now.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think sometimes we don't say what we're feeling, or we don't say what we're actually thinking or feeling because we're afraid of someone's response.
Yeah.
Like how, I don't know if you heard this saying, I heard this saying growing up, like if you don't have anything nice to say, like just don't say anything, and you're like, well, I'll be quiet a lot of the time.
But do you know what I think, and I think that all the time, do you know what I think is so ironic about that? Have you ever watched politicians on TV or your friends and family with how they respond to like, every time an election comes around? It's like gives adults the ability to, or the freedom to behave like kids. It's because people do.
Yeah,
people just
totally.
They don't really think about how it'll affect other people.
Yeah, well, I think it's also really degraded in the last,
You reckon?
decade.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, you're a bit older than me, eh? So you would know.
Yeah, that's right. Much older. I've seen lots more of life. No, I think people used to be more respectful in the sense of like you could agree to disagree, and it wasn't like and there wasn't so much personal attacking. So there was better debating potentially, like actually about concepts or things, but people didn't degrade it into this like personal attack, which is what you see now, right? It's kind of what we were talking about. With social media and just stuff that's happening now is now people go straight for the personal attack. They're not actually thinking about the concept at all. They're just trying to like attack the person's character or their clothing or just the stuff that isn't always relevant. And I think people were potentially a bit more respectful. Context, obviously. So maybe that's not an across the board statement, but I think what you hear about politics back in the day is like they could fight on the floor, like in the Senate or in Parliament, and you could like have these heated debates and discussions, but then you could go for a drink and be friends, which is what you're not seeing now. Is like now it's like, well, if you disagree with anything, like I can't even be in relationship with you at all, right? We've gone to this real extreme scary place where we've just lost a lot of humanity when it comes to that. So yeah, it is sad to watch, and I think I haven't watched many like political debates because it's so embarrassing. Like I just feel like it's cringeworthy in terms of how people are conducting themselves, and I wonder if people forget that is actually a reflection of you. Like if you're being a real jerk, actually you just look ridiculous. But anyways.
Yeah, and it's almost as if people aren't trying to push what they're going to do as a political party, whatever, what they're going to do to benefit the country. All they're communicating is how bad the opposition is doing or bringing out their flaws.
Totally.
Like you say, it's just cringeworthy, and
it's like if you're not convicted and excited about the value you bring to the table, then you have to find another way to come at it, which is usually just, okay, well, let's, instead of pointing out all the good things we're about to do, or all the things we want to see happen, or all the value we want to add, let's just attack the other person. And somehow, if we attack them worse than they attack us, then we're somehow better, right? Which nobody wins in those kind of situations. Like, think about how that would play out in your home, right? If you disagreed on something that was like, well, let's just see who can attack each other like more harshly, and whoever does the better job is somehow right. Like that doesn't make any sense. Yeah,
I'm right, and you're sleeping on the couch.
That's right.
Talk to you in 3 days.
Yeah.
But like I used that example earlier of the footage on the TV of the anti-abortion protest, and it was just literally one girl screaming at some guy who was on the opposite side of the argument, or I don't know if you want to call it argument, but it was an argument. There's no good that was going to come. It was just my view. All I can see is my own. I'm blinded by my own belief.
Which is missing the first fundamental principle of communication.
I think maybe the first three.
well, like the first fundamental principle in general is seeking first to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually probably one of the things we've lost a little bit, or that people are not quick to do. People are quick to react. People are quick to give their opinion, but they're not quick to seek understanding. And I just think, when it comes to communication, if that's all you changed, like over the next month, if all you did was work on actually trying to understand where someone else was coming from and to try and put yourself on their, on the same side of the table, try and put yourself in their shoes, I just think you would be amazed. You would be amazed at what would happen in your relationships. At work, at home, in your community. If that was all you changed, was just pausing and saying hey, I just want to make sure I understand where you're coming from.
Different conversation.
Help me understand why you see it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, again, you probably start looking for what we have in common instead of how we're different.
Yeah.
And attacking the differences. So.
Yeah. I guess I'm grateful that because of the study that I've done, that I've chosen to do, been exposed to the scientific method, critical thinking and clinical reasoning and all these things, and somehow that's subconsciously pulled into my this fundamental truth, I guess, is that whenever I'm in a situation, I have this underlying thing where it's okay, this is how I feel, but there are many other ways and many other things out there, so I guess I try and put my own feelings and observations aside for a minute to try and understand, and we spoke about this every episode probably, understand the other possible situations or outcomes first before I say, no, that's it, this is what I think and this is the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So, which is a skill, like I say, I'm lucky that I've been exposed to that type of thinking, because if you want to be any good and a good scientist, you have to have that mindset. You can't just say, no, this is that's confirmation bias, right? I found this result and that's what I think, so that's what it is. So.
Yeah, and I think we might have talked about this before, but I think true teachability is when you are willing to allow new information to expose your paradigm versus trying to filter everything through your current way of thinking. It's okay, so you give me this piece of information, well, I see the world like this, so I'm just going to filter it through that, and anything that doesn't fit with my current belief system, I'm just going to throw out, instead of pausing to think about and the probably one of the most enlightening questions is there any possibility that I could be wrong?
Yeah. And
most people just, I don't know why people are so afraid to consider the fact that they might be wrong, because maybe they link that to their worth as a person. And it's just not. It's well, you're human. So chances are pretty good that you might be wrong at some point.
Yeah. Yeah, or at least admit that you're not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, isn't that sort of, in my mind, that's what science should be, is you form this hypothesis on what you think is happening, but you're always trying to prove yourself wrong, not prove yourself right. And you only have this belief for as long as you continue to prove yourself right, and then when you say, oh, okay, so that's actually something else that's happened, so then you're flexible, right? You're able to change your beliefs as you go along through life, because you had that open mind.
Yep. And you can apply the same thing to any kind of belief system. So most people, when they come into relationships, we'll go back to the communication piece for a moment. When most people come into a relationship, they already have this huge set of beliefs around what a relationship is, or their role in something, or just their role, the way that they interact with the world. And so we bring that, and we each bring these really different lenses into a situation. And if nobody's seeking to understand, of course there's conflict. Yeah. Of course there's disagreement. Of course there's breakdown in communication. And it can be really powerful just to pause and ask yourself, so what do I actually believe about this? And am I bringing that baggage into every conversation? I'm trying to think of an example. But okay, so I'll ask you, sorry not to throw you under the bus here, but if I asked you well, what does a committed relationship mean to you?
Committed to understand where the opposite person's coming from.
Or just so say for example, I had the other day, someone's well, what does marriage mean to you? Right? And I was well, I've taken some time to think about this.
It's a big question. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to step back and...
Totally. So I because I have really thought about what that means to me, my response to that is, well, I believe marriage is a celebration of one another. And when there's that mutual trust and mutual respect that the other person is always going to do what's best for you, then you trust. Like, you have a really good relationship because you believe that they're actually trying to do what's best for you. And when you're both mutually committed to that, there's a lot of peace. Versus, like, you always feeling like you have to defend, protect, like, compete. And so I was like, well, that to me is the goal. That's kind of the point of being married, is that you not only, like, do what's best, but you actually get to go one level beyond that, which is to actually celebrate, like, who the other person is. And when someone, like, again, when it's mutually agreed upon, like, it's such a beautiful thing. But if that's not your understanding of marriage, as an example, then you're going to bring some real different lenses and some real different expectations and some real different agendas into that relationship. If you think it's about getting your needs met from someone else, you're going to have some real different conversations and some real different expectations in and around your relationship, and you're probably going to be disappointed a lot more as well.
Yeah, well, it's the same premise, I suppose, as you're thinking and acting towards something that's, like you say, not just your own needs and whatnot, but you're sort of outside of your own head a little bit, and it's a team thing, I suppose. Just what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not married, so I'm off the hook.
Yes. Right. No, you're not.
Well, I guess as an analogy, becoming a parent, you quickly realise that nothing you do is primarily for yourself anymore. You're 100% doing something for the needs of someone else or the bettering of someone else, right? So you quickly have to, stop thinking about yourself. And start thinking about the whole.
Yep. And that's why I think maybe we'll wrap up with this thought, but, like, the premise of NVC is, yes, because it creates clear communication, but I think as a parent, it also models to your kids how to think about good communication. And so if you speak to them that way, they're much more likely to then use a similar framework for going about getting their own needs met and being able to express their feelings. And so, because I had such a stunted emotional vocabulary, like, I pretty much could have told you happy, sad, angry.
Hungry.
Yeah, hungry. It's pretty much the same as angry. But, like, I people would ask, like, how are you? Good. Right? Like, it just...
Yeah, sure.
We don't often delve into those things. And I think that's probably a great place to start, is for people to just pause and ask themselves, like, what am I actually feeling right now? And what's the story behind that? And if we can start there, then obviously then it's evaluating whether or not that's actually safe to share with someone, and to, again, make it as objective as possible. So I'm not saying, like, I'm frustrated because you did this, right? It's, hey, when I see you doing this, I'm frustrated because the story I'm making up is this, and I have a need for this, whatever it is. Would you be willing, or are you open to da-da-da-da-da? So, it actually gives you a lot of just clarity. For me, it brings a lot of peace and kind of, like, calm to what I was very unfamiliar with, which was anything in the emotional realm. Like, that is not my sweet spot.
Sure.
That was not my strong point at all. Still a work in progress. Big work in progress.
Always a work in progress.
My family. But yeah, that was really helpful for me, just to start there, was to even say, like, could I even recognize, like, my own feelings and the story I was making up that was, like, I guess, like, perpetuating or kind of, like, provoking those feelings. So yeah. Any last thoughts?
No, I was going to say, I think, and myself included, if anyone listening was only going to take one thing away, I think just pausing, in that conversation or in that situation, just pausing and observe, like, what's happened, how's it affected, what's happened, and then how does it make you feel? If nothing else, just so that rather than going at it straight away. And
and that's the first part, and we'll just tie it back, as just a great thought to wrap on, is, like, because that's what you actually have control over. right? Is that personal ownership, personal responsibility is like,
What did you say last week? That's the only, well, it's the
it's
freedom
the
as a
essence
human.
of your,
Freeman, yeah.
yeah, freedom as
Freedom.
a human.
Freedom.
Fruman.
Freeman?
Yeah. But it is. It's like the true essence of your freedom as a human being is that you have the ability to pause between stimulus and response. So if you feel yourself getting riled up, that'd probably be the best thing to do is just pause, like take a breath and say like, what is happening right now? Okay, I'm angry, or I feel like real like violated in this situation, or I'm disappointed, or whatever it is. To ask yourself, what's the emotion and why is that? And then to just try it, like you said, to just observe and like be objective. Is that actually what's happening here? Like, did, he really leave his like socks on the floor again to piss me off? Which is a possibility, right? But is it the likely possibility? Probably not. Probably he got up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym and just threw something there, thinking I'll deal with it later, right? So the meaning that we give things and how much we personalize something also, I think, really makes a big difference. Like if you see other people's actions as like a personal affront or personal attack or personal thing to you, instead of being able to say like, oh, I don't know, they're probably just in their own world doing their own thing, like not really about me. And being able to take yourself out of it would be really helpful. And then the last thing is the ability to say what you need and make a request of someone. And a request is really different than a demand.
This was,
Yes. Yeah? Because how many times are we like, I'm requesting, but it comes across as a demand. And you can always tell if something is a true request versus if someone is demanding something from you by the way they respond to your no. So if you make a request of someone, like, hey, would you be willing to put your dishes in the dishwasher when you're finished? They are free, and they have to be free, to say yes, I will do that, or no, I don't want to do that. And if you attack them for saying no, then it was never a request in the first place. It was actually a demand hidden in the disguise of a request, which is a lot of parenting. But that's where you have to learn how to give kids choices. That's a different that's a whole nother topic. But yeah.
Cool.
I think we'll wrap there.
Wrap it up. Cheers.